A routine flight from Denver to Seattle. A simple request for a glass of water. And a single ugly act of prejudice that would ignite a firestorm at 30,000 feet. On board Transcontinental Airways Flight 732, Senior Flight Attendant Brenda Walsh felt powerful in control of her pressurized domain. When she looked at the unassuming black woman in seat 12B, she saw someone she could ignore, someone insignificant. But Brenda had just made the biggest mistake of her life, a career-ending blunder of spectacular proportions. Because the woman she refused to serve wasn't just another passenger. She was the one person who held the power to ground her and the entire airline permanently. This is the story of how a single moment of hate led to an unforgettable reckoning in the skies. The hum of the Airbus A321 was a familiar symphony to Dr. Evelyn Reed. It was the sound of progress, of connection, of a world stitched together by roots and regulations she knew intimately. At 52, Evelyn was more than just a frequent flyer. She was a pillar of the institution that governed the skies. As the Deputy Director of Safety Standards for the Federal Aviation Administration, her life was a meticulous study in procedure protocol and the thousands of invisible rules that kept millions of people safe every day. Today, however, she was just a passenger. Dressed in a simple but elegant navy blue pantsuit, her salt and pepper hair cut in a neat professional bob, she was flying from Denver to Seattle for the annual National Aviation Safety Symposium. She was the keynote speaker. Her luggage contained files, presentation notes, and the weight of an industry looking to her for guidance. In seat 12B, she was anonymous, and she preferred it that way. It gave her an unfiltered view of the system she worked so hard to regulate. The boarding process had been chaotic, but the crew seemed to handle it with the practiced, slightly weary efficiency common to morning flights. The senior flight attendant, a woman in her late 40s with sharp features, blonde hair, pulled into a severe bun, and a name tag that read Brenda, moved through the cabin with an air of proprietary ownership. Her smile was a thin, painted-on line that never quite reached her cold blue eyes. Evelyn noticed the small things first. A warm, genuine greeting for the man in front of her, a brusque, barely there nod for her. A cheerful offer to help a woman across the aisle with her bag, but a pointed stare at Evelyn's own carry-on as she smoothly lifted it into the overhead bin herself. These were microaggressions, the kind she had faced her entire life. Subtle, insidious paper cuts of disrespect designed to be deniable. She chose to ignore them. She was a professional on her way to do a job. She wouldn't be rattled by poor customer service. The plane reached cruising altitude and the seatbelt sign pinged off. The beverage service began. Brenda and a younger, visibly nervous flight attendant named Chloe started at the front of the economy cabin. Evelyn watched Brenda's interactions. She was a chameleon of service. With the white passengers, especially the businessmen in suits, her voice was honeyed, her movements gracious. "Another coffee, Mr. Davison?" "Of course. Let me get you some biscotti to go with that." To the young family, she was grandmotherly and patient. But as the cart drew nearer to row 12, Evelyn felt a familiar tension coil in her stomach. It was the precursor to a confrontation she never sought, but was always prepared for. Brenda served the man in the aisle seat, 12C, a portly gentleman named David, who ordered a ginger ale. She then turned her body, angling the heavy cart to perfectly block access to Evelyn, and addressed the young man in the window seat, 12A Mark Peterson. "And for you, sir?" Brenda asked, her voice bright. "Just a water, please," Mark replied briefly, looking up from his laptop. Brenda retrieved a bottle, handed it to him with a flourish, and then, in a move of breathtaking deliberation, She began to push the cart forward. She had completely skipped Evelyn. Not with a glance, not with an oversight. It was a conscious, physical erasure. She had served the man on her right and the man on her left, leaving her in an island of pointed neglect. Evelyn waited a moment, giving Brenda the benefit of the doubt. Perhaps she was distracted. She cleared her throat softly. "Excuse me." Brenda stopped the cart a row ahead and turned her expression one of pure theatrical annoyance, as if Evelyn were a misbehaving child. "Yes." The word was clipped cold. "I believe you missed me." Evelyn said, her voice even and calm. She refused to let emotion creep in. "I'd just like a bottle of water, please." Brenda's thin smile returned, but it was sharper now, laced with something cruel. "I'll get to you when I'm able," she said, her voice loud enough for the surrounding rows to hear. "We have a process we follow here." She then turned her back and continued serving the next row as if the conversation had never happened. The man in 12C, David, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Mark in 12A lowered his laptop screen, slightly, his eyes wide with disbelief. He glanced at Evelyn, a silent question in his eyes. Evelyn gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head, a gesture that said, "Let it be for now." But it was not to be. This was not an oversight. This was a statement. And in the tightly controlled environment of an aircraft cabin, where every action is scrutinized, Brenda Walsh had just declared a silent, one-sided war. She had no idea she was doing it in front of the one woman who wrote the rule book. The beverage cart completed its journey down the aisle and returned manned this time by the junior attendant Chloe, who was collecting trash. As she passed row 12, Chloe's eyes met Evelyn's. They were kind, apologetic eyes, full of a stress that seemed disproportionate to her role. "Ma'am," Chloe whispered, leaning in slightly, "did you still want that water? I can grab one for you from the galley." Before Evelyn could reply, Brenda's voice sliced through the cabin air from a few rows back. "Chloe, stick to the procedure. Trash collection only on the return pass. No special deliveries." Chloe flinched as if struck. She shot Evelyn a look of pure mortification and whispered, "I'm so sorry," before scurrying away. Her shoulders hunched. The public rebuke was another calculated move. Brenda wasn't just denying a service. She was demonstrating her power, making it clear to Evelyn and to the rest of the cabin who was in charge. She was isolating her, marking her as someone undeserving of even the most basic courtesy. Evelyn Reed was not a woman given to public displays of anger. Her power lay in her composure, her intellect, and her unshakable authority. She had dismantled the careers of belligerent airline CEOs and arrogant union bosses with little more than a calm voice and an encyclopedic knowledge of the federal aviation regulations. A flight attendant on a power trip was an annoyance, but one that was now escalating into a pattern of behavior that touched on regulatory concerns. Crew member hostility and targeted harassment weren't just customer service issues. They could create a volatile environment, a distraction that in a crisis could be dangerous. She decided to try one more time directly and professionally. She unbuckled her seatbelt, stood up, and walked the few steps to the forward galley, where Brenda was sorting supplies. "Miss Walsh," Evelyn began, her voice low but firm. Brenda didn't look up immediately. She continued arranging miniature liquor bottles in a drawer, making Evelyn wait. Finally, she turned her face a mask of irritated condescension. "The seatbelt sign is off, but we do ask that passengers remain seated as much as possible. Is there a problem?" "Yes, there is," Evelyn said calmly. I have twice requested a bottle of water, and have been twice ignored or refused. The cabin is quite dry. I would like to know why you are denying me a basic service that you have provided to every other passenger around me." Brenda leaned against the counter, crossing her arms. It was a posture of defiance of someone settling in for a fight she was confident she would win. "Ma'am," she said, drawing out the word, "I am the senior flight attendant on this aircraft. I have been doing this job for 22 years. I have a system. You were preoccupied when I came by, and I am now busy with other duties. You are not the only passenger on this plane." It was a blatant, transparent lie. Evelyn hadn't been preoccupied. She had been looking directly at her. "I was not preoccupied," Evelyn stated, her voice losing none of its calm. "You made eye contact with the passengers on either side of me and skipped me. Your colleague attempted to rectify your oversight, and you publicly reprimanded her for it. So I will ask again. Is there a specific reason you are refusing me service?" The directness of the question, the refusal to be gaslighted, seemed to infuriate Brenda. The veneer of professionalism, thin as it was, cracked completely. "Look," she snapped, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "I don't know what kind of attitude you brought on this plane with you, but you are not going to get special treatment. I will get you your water when I am good and ready. Now, if you would please return to your seat and stop interfering with my duties, I would appreciate it." She turned her back, a clear gesture of dismissal. Back in his seat, Mark Peterson, the young software developer by the window, had seen the whole exchange. He'd seen the initial snub, heard the reprimand of the younger flight attendant, and watched Dr. Reed's calm, dignified walk to the galley. He'd seen Brenda's aggressive posture and heard the sharp, dismissive tone. Something inside him snapped. This wasn't right. He discreetly pulled out his phone, angled it on his lap, and hit record. Evelyn stood in the galley for a moment, the low hum of the engines filling the sudden silence. She was no longer just a thirsty passenger. She was now an FAA official observing a crew member demonstrating clear and targeted animosity towards a passenger creating a hostile environment and lying to her face. This had crossed a line. She returned to her seat. Her mind was already shifting from personal slight to professional assessment. She noted the time, the flight number, the crew member's name. Her keynote speech in Seattle suddenly seemed secondary. A much more immediate safety and compliance issue was unfolding right here in row 12. A few minutes later, Brenda stormed down the aisle. She stopped at row 12, and with a look of utter contempt, she unceremoniously slammed a plastic bottle of water onto Evelyn's tray table. The crack of the plastic hitting the table echoed in the quiet cabin. "There," Brenda hissed, her face inches from Evelyn's. "Are you satisfied now?" Evelyn didn't touch the bottle. She looked at Brenda, her eyes holding a deep, unwavering calm that seemed to unnerve the flight attendant more than any shouting match could have. "No," Evelyn said, her voice quiet, but carrying the weight of impending consequence. "No, I'm not." The atmosphere in the rows surrounding 12B had grown thick with tension. Passengers exchanged uneasy glances. The blatant hostility was impossible to ignore. David, the man in the aisle seat, sank lower, trying to become invisible. Mark Peterson kept his phone recording, capturing the stony silence that followed Brenda's outburst. Brenda, perhaps sensing she had gone too far, in front of so many witnesses, scoffed and walked away, trying to project an air of finality. In her mind, the confrontation was over. She had put the uppity passenger in her place. She had won. Evelyn Reed let the silence sit for a full minute. She didn't pick up the water bottle. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap. Her mind, however, was racing, processing the incident through the cold, hard framework of federal regulations. This wasn't about a personal grudge anymore. This was about a fitness for duty. 14. CFR FAD 121.533. Responsibility of the pilot in command. The captain is responsible for the safety of all passengers and crew. 49. U.S. Code TOR 46504. Interference with flight crew members and attendants, while usually applied to passengers' crew-on-crew or crew-on-passenger hostility, could be seen as a disruption to the safe operation of an aircraft. Civil Rights Act of 1964. Title 6. Prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, or national origin in programs and activities receiving federal financial assistance. Airlines are federal contractors. This single ugly incident sat at the dangerous intersection of all three. Evelyn calmly pressed the flight attendant call button above her head. A few moments later, the light dinged off, and Chloe, the junior attendant, appeared. Her face was pale, and she looked terrified. "Yes, ma'am. Is everything all right?" "I need to speak with the senior flight attendant and the pilot in command," Evelyn said, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. It was not a request. Chloe's eyes widened. "The captain, ma'am. He's very busy." "I am aware of his duties," Evelyn said, maintaining her quiet authority. "Please inform him that a passenger needs to report a potential safety and compliance issue regarding a member of his crew. Use those exact words." The phrase safety and compliance issue was a trigger. It was airline jargon that elevated a complaint from the realm of spilled coffee to a formal, documented incident. Chloe nodded, a flicker of understanding and fear in her eyes, and hurried towards the cockpit. A minute later, Brenda reappeared, her face a thundercloud of fury. "I have had it with you," she seethed, keeping her voice low. "Chloe told me what you said. Who in the hell do you think you are, trying to intimidate my crew, trying to get me in trouble?" "I am a passenger on this aircraft who has been subjected to unprofessional and discriminatory behavior," Evelyn said, her gaze steady. "I have a right to report that." Brenda laughed, a short, ugly bark. "A right, honey. You have a right to sit down and be quiet. You can write a letter to customer service when we land. They have a special file for complaints like yours. It's called the trash." This was the moment. The final irrevocable line had been crossed. "I see," Evelyn said softly. "In that case, I'll need your full name and your FAA-issued certificate number, please." Brenda froze. A flight attendant's certificate number was not something passengers ever asked for. The request was so out of the ordinary, so official-sounding that it momentarily broke through her rage. But her arrogance quickly reasserted itself. She mistook it for a bluff, an attempt by a passenger who thought she knew the rules to sound important. "You're not getting anything from me," Brenda sneered. "Now for the last time. Your name is Brenda Walsh." Evelyn interrupted, her voice dropping into a quiet, almost lethal register. "According to the crew manifest I saw during boarding, you've been with Transcontinental for 22 years. Your employee ID is 774B3. But what I need is your airman certificate number. You are required by Federal Aviation Regulation, Part 61, to present it to an authorized administrator of the FAA upon request, and I am requesting it now." The level of detail, the years of service, the format of the employee ID stunned Brenda into silence. Her sneer faltered, replaced by a flicker of genuine confusion. How could this woman possibly know that? From her briefcase under the seat in front of her, Evelyn calmly retrieved a slim black leather wallet. She didn't flash it. She didn't make a show of it. She simply opened it and placed it on the tray table next to the offending water bottle. Inside, behind a clear plastic window, was a laminated identification card. It featured her photograph, her name, and a gold-embossed seal of the United States Department of Transportation. The words, printed in bold, unmistakable letters, were Federal Aviation Administration, Evelyn Reed, Ph.D., Deputy Director, Office of Safety Standards. Aviation. Safety. Inspector, credential number 007. The cabin, already tense, seemed to fall into a vacuum of absolute silence. Mark Peterson's phone was still recording, the lens now focused squarely on the ID. Brenda Walsh's face, which had been contorted with rage and arrogance, went through a rapid, visible transformation. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving behind a pasty, sickly white. Her eyes, wide with shock, darted from the ID to Evelyn's face and back again. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. The condescending smirk, the posture of power, the years of bitterness, it all evaporated in an instant, replaced by the raw, primal terror of a creature that has just realized the mouse it was toying with is actually a python. Evelyn leaned forward slightly, her voice a devastatingly calm whisper that cut through Brenda's shock. "This is no longer a customer service issue, Miss Walsh," she said. "This is a federal investigation, and you are the subject of it." The silence in the cabin was broken by a choked, strangled sound from Brenda. Her carefully constructed world of authority had been shattered by a single piece of plastic and a title. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted, it had inverted with the force of a tectonic plate. "No," Brenda whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. "No, you can't be." "I can assure you I am," Evelyn replied, her voice devoid of any triumph. This wasn't a victory, it was a grim necessity. She gestured to the ID with a quiet finality. "As I said, I require your certificate number. Now!" Brenda's legs seemed to give way. She stumbled back, grabbing the seat back for support. The blood that had drained from her face now rushed back her skin, turning a blotchy red. Panic had set in, raw and unfiltered. "It was a misunderstanding," she stammered, her voice a high, reedy plea. I was stressed. The flight was overbooked, we had a delay. I didn't mean anything by it. I can get you anything you want. Champagne. A first-class meal." The sudden pathetic attempt at bribery was more damning than her initial hostility. It showed a complete lack of integrity. "The time for offering me a drink has long since passed," Evelyn said, her voice like ice. "What you have done here, Miss Walsh, is demonstrate a temperament wholly unsuitable for a safety-sensitive position. You have engaged in discriminatory behavior. You have been insubordinate to a reasonable passenger request, and you have created a hostile environment. And you have done it all in front of numerous witnesses." As if on cue, the cockpit door opened. Captain Miller, a silver-haired man with a stern, no-nonsense expression, emerged, followed by the terrified-looking Chloe. He had clearly been briefed that there was a serious problem, and his face was a mask of annoyance at having been disturbed during flight. "What in God's name is going on out here?" he demanded, his eyes sweeping over the scene, Brenda looking like she was about to collapse, and Evelyn sitting with a formidable calm. "I was told there was a compliance issue." Before Brenda could launch into a panicked, self-serving explanation, Evelyn simply held up her FAA credentials. Captain Miller stopped dead. He leaned in his eyes, squinting to read the text. The annoyance on his face melted away, replaced by the same sequence of shock and dawning horror that had consumed Brenda. A pilot's entire career rests on the approval of the FAA. Having a deputy director on his flight witnessing this kind of meltdown was the ultimate nightmare scenario. "Dr. Reed," he said, his voice suddenly respectful, deferential. I am Captain Frank Miller. I had no idea. I am so sorry for any disturbance." "The disturbance, Captain, is your senior flight attendant," Evelyn said, her gaze shifting to Brenda. "For the past hour, she has engaged in a campaign of targeted harassment against me, culminating in this confrontation. Her behavior is a liability to this airline and a danger to the safe operation of this aircraft." Brenda began to sob. Not quiet tears of remorse, but loud, heaving gulps of pure self-pity. "He's lying. She's lying." She was being difficult. She had an attitude from the moment she got on board. It was a desperate final gamble, and it failed spectacularly. "Actually, that's not true," a voice said from the window seat. All eyes turned to Mark Peterson. He held up his phone. "I've been recording since the second time she refused to serve you, ma'am," he said, addressing Evelyn. "I have the whole thing. Her slamming the water bottle down. Her threatening you. It's all right here." The digital evidence. The final nail in the coffin. Captain Miller looked at Brenda with a gaze of pure, unadulterated fury. He had been placed in an impossible, career-threatening position by her prejudice. "Brenda," he said, his voice a low growl. "Go to the aft galley. Now. Do not speak to another passenger. Do not touch anything. Just sit there until we are on the ground. Chloe," he said, turning to the junior attendant, "you are now in charge of the cabin. Is that understood?" Chloe, though still trembling, stood up a little straighter. "Yes, Captain." "Good," he said. He then turned back to Evelyn, his face grim. "Dr. Reed, on behalf of Transcontinental Airways, I apologize. This is unacceptable. We will be communicating with air traffic control, and a full team of airline executives and FAA liaisons will be meeting our flight upon arrival. I assure you this will be handled with the utmost seriousness." "I have no doubt of that, Captain," Evelyn replied. She finally picked up the water bottle Brenda had slammed on her table. She didn't drink it. She simply held it, a symbol of the entire sordid affair. As a sobbing Brenda was led away down the aisle, her 22-year career, ending in a walk of shame, the passengers who had witnessed the drama erupted into quiet, spontaneous applause. It wasn't loud or celebratory, but a soft rolling wave of support for the quiet, dignified woman in 12B who had refused to be broken. The descent into Seattle-Tacoma International Airport was tense. The normal, cheerful chatter of a plane preparing to land was absent. Chloe and the other flight attendant moved through the cabin with quiet, somber efficiency, their faces tight with a mixture of fear and relief. Captain Miller made an announcement over the intercom. His voice strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to an unforeseen personnel issue on board, we ask that you remain in your seats after the aircraft has reached the gate. We will require a few moments before beginning the deplaning process. We apologize for the delay, and thank you for your cooperation." The phrase personnel issue sent a ripple of murmurs through the cabin, but everyone in the vicinity of row 12 knew exactly what it meant. As the plane taxied to the gate, Evelyn could see them waiting on the jet bridge through her window. It wasn't the usual ground crew. There were 3 men in dark suits, airline executives, their faces grim. Standing with them were 2 other individuals, a man and a woman whose professional bearing and serious expressions screamed federal agent. They were from the FAA's regional office, scrambled to the airport the moment Captain Miller had radioed in the code for an incident involving a high-level government official. The moment the seatbelt sign switched off, Captain Miller's voice came over the PA again. "Dr. Reed, we are ready for you." Evelyn stood, and a path was cleared for her to the front of the plane. As she passed Mark Peterson, she paused. "Mr. Peterson, your video will be crucial. I would appreciate it if you would provide a copy to the investigators." "Absolutely," Mark said, his voice filled with admiration. "It was the least I could do." "Thank you." Evelyn was the first person off the plane. She was met immediately by Robert Vance, the FAA's Pacific Region Administrator. "Dr. Reed, we came as soon as we heard. Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Robert," she said, shaking his hand, "but we have a serious problem on this aircraft." The three transcontinental executives, led by their Vice President of In-Flight Services, a man named Michael Chen, looked like they were facing a firing squad. Chen was pale, his hands clasped in front of him. "Dr. Reed, on behalf of our entire airline, I cannot express how horrified and deeply sorry we are for what you experienced. It is inexcusable." "Save the apologies, Michael," Evelyn said, her tone all business now. "What I want is your assurance that this will be addressed systemically. This wasn't just one rogue employee. This was a failure of culture and oversight." A moment later, Brenda Walsh was escorted off the plane. She wasn't wearing her uniform jacket anymore. She wasn't part of the crew. She was flanked by airline security. Her head bowed, her face streaked with tears. Her eyes briefly met Evelyn's, and in them was a desperate, pleading look. But Evelyn's face was impassive stone. There was no pity to be found there, only the cold, hard reality of consequences. Brenda was taken to a private room for an immediate interview, the first step in a process that would end her career. The investigation was swift and brutal. Evelyn gave her statement first, a dispassionate, precise recounting of the events, filled with Times direct quotes and specific regulatory violations. Her credibility was unimpeachable. Next came Mark Peterson. He was escorted off the plane and eagerly handed over his phone. The video was damning. It was clear the audio was crisp, and it captured the venom in Brenda's voice and the controlled dignity in Evelyn's. It corroborated every single word of Evelyn's report. There was no ambiguity, no room for excuses. Then came Chloe, the young flight attendant. Her voice, trembling but resolute, gave her statement. She confirmed the initial snub during the beverage service. She recounted how Brenda had publicly reprimanded her for trying to help. She spoke of a pattern of behavior of Brenda's long-standing reputation for being a bully, especially towards junior staff, and she admitted hesitantly towards passengers of color. She had been too afraid to report it before, but no longer. She was choosing the right side of history. The airline's union representative for Brenda arrived full of bluster and ready to defend his client. He listened to her tearful, rambling version of events, where she painted herself as the victim of a difficult passenger. Then the investigators played him Mark Peterson's video. The union rep watched it, his face growing progressively grimmer. He watched Brenda slam the water bottle down. He heard her hiss, "Are you satisfied now?" He saw the FAA credentials. When the video ended, he simply took off his glasses, rubbed his eyes, and said to the airline executives, "Our official position is that Ms. Walsh's actions do not reflect the values of our union or the professionalism of our members. We will not be contesting the termination." By the end of the day, Brenda Walsh was fired. But for Dr. Evelyn Reed, that was only the beginning. Firing her solved the problem of one prejudiced employee. It did nothing to address the culture that allowed her to fester for 22 years. The real karma was yet to come. In the digital age, consequences are rarely contained. They ripple outward, amplified by clicks and shares, until they become as a tidal wave. For Brenda Walsh and Transcontinental Airways, the tsunami was about to hit. Mark Peterson, with the permission of the FAA investigators, posted a condensed 2-minute version of his video to social media. He wrote a simple, factual caption. "This is what happened on my transcontinental flight from Denver to Seattle today. The passenger being denied service and verbally abused is Dr. Evelyn Reed, a deputy director of the FAA. This flight attendant's name is Brenda Walsh." He posted it before he went to sleep. When he woke up, it had 10 million views. The video went supernova. #Fly the Prejudiced, Skies, and Much Transcon Brenda trended globally. News outlets picked it up immediately. CNN, BBC, Fox News, The New York Times. The story was irresistible, a clear-as-day act of racism, a satisfying David and Goliath twist, and irrefutable video proof. Brenda Walsh's face was suddenly plastered across every screen in the world, a symbol of corporate rot and personal bigotry. The karma for Brenda was swift and merciless. Professional karma. Getting fired was just the first step. Dr. Evelyn Reed's official report led to an immediate FAA review of Brenda's airman certificate. Citing her reckless and discriminatory behavior and finding her to be a risk to public safety and the maintenance of an orderly cabin environment, the FAA issued an emergency revocation of her flight attendant certification. This was the career death penalty. She could never work as a flight attendant on any U.S. carrier or any airline that code-shared with one ever again. Her 22 years of seniority, her travel benefits, her pension, all gone. Social karma. The viral video made her a pariah. She was publicly shamed on an unimaginable scale. Her address was leaked. She received thousands of furious emails and messages. Restaurants in her hometown refused to serve her. Her friends, embarrassed by the association, slowly ghosted her. She became a prisoner in her own home, the face of a national scandal. The power and control she craved in the cabin were gone, replaced by total powerlessness. But the real reckoning was reserved for the airline that had enabled her. Corporate karma. Transcontinental Airways was plunged into the worst public relations crisis in its history. Their stock price plummeted 18% in 2 days, wiping out over $1 billion in market value. Boycotts were organized. Corporate accounts threatened to pull their contracts. Their carefully crafted image of friendly, reliable service was shattered. The FAA, with Dr. Reed, recusing herself from the direct proceedings to avoid a conflict of interest, but having set the entire investigation in motion, came down on the airline like a hammer. They launched a full-scale audit of Transcontinental's hiring practices, training protocols, and complaint history. What they found was a disgrace. Over the past decade, Brenda Walsh had accumulated 19 formal passenger complaints, 7 of which specifically mentioned rude or discriminatory behavior towards minorities. The airline's internal system had flagged her as a high-risk employee, yet she was never disciplined, only shuffled to different routes. Her seniority and her union protection had made her untouchable. The airline had chosen to ignore the problem rather than confront it. The FAA levied one of the largest fines in aviation history against Transcontinental, $5.2 million for violations of civil rights statutes and for failing to ensure crew members were fit for duty. But the financial penalty was nothing compared to the structural changes the FAA mandated. Transcontinental was forced to enter into a consent decree. They had to completely overhaul their anti-discrimination and de-escalation training for all 15,000 of their flight attendants. They had to implement a new transparent system for tracking and acting on passenger complaints with direct FAA oversight. And in the ultimate twist of karmic justice, the FAA appointed an outside consultant to design and supervise this new training program. The consultant chosen at the unanimous recommendation of the FAA board was the nationally recognized expert on aviation safety compliance and procedural justice, Dr. Evelyn Reed, the woman whom Brenda Walsh had deemed unworthy of a bottle of water was now in charge of re-educating the entire airline. She had not just gotten an apology. She had seized the power to ensure this would never happen to anyone else again. A year is both a lifetime and the blink of an eye. For the people whose lives were irrevocably altered on transcontinental flight 732, that single rotation around the sun brought transformations so profound they could scarcely recognize the world or themselves from the year before. The incident wasn't a contained explosion. It was a seismic event, and its aftershocks continued to reshape the landscape of their lives and an entire industry. Dr. Evelyn Reed, the accidental icon. In the immediate days following the flight, Evelyn Reed's life of quiet, high-level anonymity was shattered. Her phone rang incessantly with calls from every major news network. Her email inbox was a digital flood of interview requests, speaking invitations and messages from ordinary people sharing their own stories of discrimination. Initially, she resisted. She was a regulator, not a celebrity. Her work was done in boardrooms and through meticulously crafted federal notices, not on talk show couches. Her perspective shifted during a tense meeting with the shell-shocked CEO of Transcontinental Airways, a man named Richard Klein. He had flown to Washington, D.C. to offer a personal, groveling apology. In his plush emergency office, surrounded by anxious PR consultants, he offered Evelyn a settlement, a 7-figure sum, a lifetime of first-class travel. Anything she wanted to make this go away. Evelyn looked at the powerful man, his expensive suit and desperate eyes, and saw the root of the problem. He saw this as a fire to be extinguished with money. He didn't see the systemic rot. "Mr. Klein," she said, her voice calm, but carrying the full weight of her authority. "I don't want your money. I don't want your first-class seats. I want your culture. I want your training manuals. I want the hearts and minds of every single employee who believes their uniform gives them the right to dehumanize another person. You're not going to pay me off. You're going to pay for a complete institutional re-education, and the FAA is going to hold your hand every step of the way." It was in that moment she embraced her new role. She was no longer just an observer of the system. She was its architect of change. The Evelyn Reed Protocol was her magnum opus. She threw herself into its design with the same meticulous precision she applied to air safety directives. It was a revolutionary approach. She discarded the old stale PowerPoint presentations on diversity and inclusion, which she knew from experience were treated as a joke by cynical, long-serving employees. Instead, she created immersive, real-world simulations. Transcontinental was forced to build a full-scale cabin mock-up at their main training facility. Evelyn hired a troupe of professional actors to portray a spectrum of passengers, a non-English-speaking family, struggling with instructions, a man with a hidden disability that made him seem slow or difficult, a businessman whose arrogance masked deep anxiety, and of course, calm, professional black women who were simply trying to exist. Trainees were thrown into these unscripted scenarios, and their responses were recorded and analyzed, not for procedural correctness, but for their core of human empathy. She championed the use of virtual reality modules that put flight attendants in the shoes of a passenger experiencing microaggressions, allowing them to feel the subtle sting of being ignored or spoken down to. She led workshops herself, not as a remote FAA director, but as a fellow human being. She stood before rooms of new and veteran flight attendants and told them, "Your primary job is not to serve drinks. It is to maintain a safe and stable environment. And you cannot do that if you see the people in your care as obstacles instead of human beings. Hostility is a form of turbulence, and it is your job to smooth it out, not create it." Her work culminated in a summons to testify before a Senate subcommittee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation, which was exploring a new passenger Bill of Rights inspired by the viral incident. Sitting before the panel of powerful senators, she was no longer just Dr. Evelyn Reed, FAA regulator. She was the face of every person who had ever been made to feel small, invisible, or unworthy. Her testimony, delivered without notes, was a quiet, devastating indictment of an industry that had prioritized schedules over humanity. "An airplane cabin is a unique space," she concluded, her voice echoing in the hallowed chamber. "It is a fragile community, sealed in a metal tube flying miles above the earth. That community relies on a covenant of mutual respect. When that covenant is broken by someone in a position of authority, it is not merely poor customer service. It is a fundamental breach of safety and a betrayal of trust. We regulate the structural integrity of the fuselage. It is time we started regulating the moral integrity of the service within it." The senators were silent for a moment, and then the chamber erupted in applause. Evelyn Reed, the quiet regulator, had found her voice, and it was changing the world. Mark Peterson. The citizen watchdog. Mark Peterson never wanted to be famous. The morning he woke up to find his video had become a global phenomenon was terrifying. His phone was a vibrating brick of notifications. Tech blogs wanted to interview him about the power of citizen journalism. News channels wanted to fly him to New York. He was offered book deals and representation by talent agents. He turned it all down. He did one single interview with a respected national journalist in which he repeatedly deflected praise. "I just pushed a button," he insisted. "Dr. Reed is the hero. She stood up to a bully with grace and strength. I was just the guy in the window seat who happened to have a camera." After the initial storm passed, he tried to return to his normal life. But the world wouldn't let him. He became the water guy. Strangers would recognize him in coffee shops and offer to buy him a bottle of water. While he found it awkward, he understood the sentiment behind it. He had become a symbol of doing the right thing. The lifetime supply of flights from Transcontinental sat unused for months, a strange and valuable prize he wasn't sure what to do with. Then an idea began to form. He started a travel blog, but it wasn't about luxury resorts or finding the best food. He called it Row 12B in honor of Dr. Reed's seat. His mission was simple. He flew on different airlines on different routes, and he documented his experiences from the perspective of passenger rights and dignity. He wrote about the flight attendants who went above and beyond the gate agents who handled stressful situations with grace, and when he saw it, the subtle instances of poor treatment that were so often swept under the rug. His blog, backed by the credibility of his famous video, became surprisingly influential. Airlines knew he could be on any of their flights. His quiet, factual reports on everything from the cleanliness of restrooms to the way crews handled passengers with disabilities forced a new level of accountability. He was no longer just the man who recorded an incident. He had become an independent, respected watchdog, a permanent, quiet reminder to the entire industry that the passengers were always watching. Chloe Daniels. The new guard. For Chloe, the aftermath was a whirlwind of terror and vindication. Giving her statement against a senior colleague she had feared for years was the hardest thing she had ever done. She was convinced her career was over, that she would be labeled a snitch and blacklisted. Instead, she was called into a meeting with Michael Chen, the vice president, who had met Dr. Reed on the jet bridge. He looked like a man who had aged a decade in a week. "Chloe," he began, his voice weary. "I've reviewed your file. You've had nothing but stellar performance reviews, and your testimony in this matter showed an integrity that, frankly, this company has been sorely lacking. Brenda Walsh represented the worst of our past. We need you to help us build our future." He offered her a promotion to lead flight attendant and a position on the advisory committee for implementing the new Evelyn Reed protocol. She was stunned. Through tears, she accepted. Chloe became the living embodiment of the airline's cultural shift. She excelled in her new role not because she was a disciplinarian, but because she led with the empathy Brenda had so brutally lacked. She mentored new hires, sharing the story of Flight 732, not to scare them, but to inspire them. "Never be afraid to do the right thing," she would tell them in the training mock-up, the same one Dr. Reed had designed. "Never let your fear of a senior colleague stop you from showing basic kindness to a passenger. One act of compassion can save a person's day, and one act of cruelty can destroy a career and cripple an airline. The choice is always yours." Her quiet strength and unwavering moral compass made her one of the most respected figures in the new transcontinental airways, a symbol of hope and a promise of a better future. Brenda Walsh. The long, silent penance. For Brenda Walsh, there was no redemption arc. There was only the slow, grinding erosion of a life she had taken for granted. The firing was immediate. The FAA's revocation of her certificate was the death blow. The union's abandonment was the final betrayal. Her carefully constructed world, built on seniority and a sense of superiority, crumbled into dust. The viral shaming was a unique form of modern torture. She couldn't leave her house without being recognized. The sneer on her face in the video was burned into the public consciousness. People would whisper as she passed in the grocery store aisle. A teenager yelled, "Transcon Brenda," at her from a passing car. Her friends, one by one, stopped returning her calls, their polite excuses barely masking their horror and embarrassment. She was radioactive. The hate mail was relentless. But worse than the threats were the letters from people, mostly people of color, detailing their own experiences of humiliation at the hands of people like her. For the first time in her life, she was forced to confront the receiving end of the casual cruelty she had dispensed for years. Her finances collapsed. Without a job, she burned through her savings paying lawyers who could do nothing for her. She sold her condo, the symbol of her successful career, at a loss just to have enough money to disappear. She packed her remaining belongings into her 10-year-old car and drove 1,400 miles to a dreary anonymous town in the Midwest where no one knew her name. She found a job at a 24-hour value mart, taking the overnight shift from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. to minimize human contact. Her new uniform was a cheap, ill-fitting polyester vest. Her world shrank from the sprawling global routes of an airline to the monotonous, fluorescent-lit aisles of a discount store. Her view was no longer of the clouds from 30,000 feet, but of stacked pallets of toilet paper and canned goods. The authority she once wielded was gone, replaced by the weary ache in her lower back and the smell of floor cleaner. One cold Tuesday morning around 4 a.m., a young black woman with a baby in her shopping cart was browsing the cereal aisle. The baby, fussy and tired, knocked a box of Cheerios off the shelf, and it burst open, spilling the contents across the floor. The woman gasped, mortified. "Oh my God! I am so sorry," she said, her eyes wide with panic as she fumbled to clean it up. Brenda stood at the end of the aisle watching. A year ago, her face would have hardened. A sigh of theatrical annoyance would have escaped her lips. She would have made the woman feel small, incompetent, a nuisance. But now something different happened. She looked at the young mother's panicked face, and for the first time she didn't see an inconvenience. She saw a person, a tired mum, with a fussy baby in the middle of the night. A wave of something unfamiliar, not pity, but a profound, hollow ache of recognition washed over her. She saw the humanity she had spent a lifetime denying in others. She walked forward, her movements slow, deliberate. "Don't you worry about that," Brenda said, her voice raspy from disuse. "It happens." She went to the back room and returned with a broom and a dustpan. She didn't say another word. She just knelt down her knees, cracking on the cold linoleum, and began to sweep up the mess. The young woman stood watching her, whispering thank you over and over. Brenda didn't look up. She couldn't, because her eyes were filled with tears, and if she looked up, she knew they would fall. In the sterile silence of aisle 6, surrounded by the debris of spilled cereal, Brenda Walsh began her long, quiet, and utterly anonymous penance. It wasn't forgiveness. It was the crushing weight of a consequence she would carry for the rest of her life. This story is a powerful reminder that prejudice and pride can lead to a devastating downfall, while integrity and courage can change the world. Brenda Walsh thought her uniform gave her power, but she learned that real power lies in respect, something she refused to give, and in the end could not command. Dr. Evelyn Reed didn't seek a fight, but when confronted with injustice, she used her authority not for revenge, but for reform, making the skies safer and fairer for everyone. If you believe that accountability is essential and that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, hit that like button to show your support. Share this video so others can hear this incredible story of karma and consequence. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into stories where justice is served. Let us know in the comments below, what part of Brenda's karma do you think was the most fitting? We want to hear from you. Thank you for listening.